All right. Good evening. Welcome. It's been on and off the last couple of weeks, and it probably will continue being like this for the next couple of weeks. So thank you for bearing with me. Erev Tov, Parshas Vayetze. Parshas Vayetze comes as a continuation of the last week's Parsha, where in last week's Parsha, Yaakov ends up deceiving his brother Esav, and first he takes away from him the birthright. That's the first thing he does. He takes away from Esav the ability to be the firstborn, even though physically, naturally, biologically, Esau was the firstborn child. We learned last week how Yaakov persuades, and in a very sophisticated way, manages to pull out from his brother Esav the Bechoira, all those privileges that comes with being a firstborn. And as the parsha evolves and continues, telling us a little bit more about Yitzchak's life, the parsha concludes with the story of Yitzchak requesting from Esav to go and bring him the blessings, bring him food, and he will bless him. And Yaakov, by the instruction of his mother, by the help of his mother Rivka, Yaakov manages to come into Esav, coming to Yitzchak, and take away the blessings from his brother. And in last week's reading, we read about these two events who brought about that not only Yaakov received those blessings that belong really to Esav, that Yitzchak intended to give to Esav, Yaakov also took from Esav something that was very essential, that this is all the privileges that comes in being a firstborn. The parsha concluded with Rivka. After hearing that Esav is very upset and he's just waiting for Yitzchak to die in order to kill his brother Yaakov, Rivka summons his son Yaakov and she asks him to flee. And Yaakov runs. First of all, he's hiding for 14 years. He's hiding in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. It's the yeshiva of where our patriarchs have studied, by Shem, the son of Noah, and Aver, the son of Shem. And then, in this week's Parsha, Yaakov begins his journey down to Haran. Parshas Vayetze. The entire Parsha is dedicated to the story of Yaakov leaving Be'er Sheva, leaving his father's house, and descending, going down to Haran. The Parsha will tell us the story of Yaakov's arrival to Haran, finding Rachel attractive, intending to marry Rachel as a wife. And as the story will evolve, Yaakov ends up with Leah. He ends up giving birth to 6 children with Leah. Then he ends up giving birth to 2 children with the maid, Bilhah, and another 2 children with the maid, Zilpah. And with Rachel, the beloved one of his life, he ends up having, in this week's Parsha, he ends up having only one child named Yosef. Next week, we're going to read about the last one of the 12 tribes, the birth of Binyamin. And this is also where we're going to read about the passing of Rachel. This week's Parsha is basically the birth of Am Yisrael, the birth of the Jewish people as a nation. Avram was the beginning. Yitzchak was a single child to Avram, meaning to say the single Jewish child. In this week's Parsha, we actually begin the expansion. As Yaakov gets married to Rachel and Leah, to the matriarchs, now begins the story of us becoming a great family, what we call the 12 tribes. This is the story of the Jewish people becoming a people. And really, in the beginning of the Parsha, it's already indicated that Yaakov is going to create this great nation. Parsha begins with this, that Yaakov leaves Beersheba, he goes down to Haran. And on the way, to Haran, he passes by Bamokom, in the place, by Ivga Bamokom. It's a very particular place. This is the place where our forefathers, Yitzchak, Avram, all the way to Adam and Eve. This is the place where our patriarchs have brought offerings and prayed to God throughout history. Yaakov ends up sleeping in that place, and he has a dream, and he sees angels going up and down the ladder. And when he wakes up from the dream, he erects a stone and he turns it into a monument, and he offers there an offering to God, pouring oil over it. And this is where God Almighty appears to him and he tells him, "You are on the journey to create the Bnei Yisrael. You're on the journey to go down and to create a great family." And I know God Almighty is addressing all of the uncertainties. He tells him, first of all, you're going to have many children. He tells him the land that you were sleeping on, this entire land will be yours. Then God tells him, I will be with you, I will guard you anywhere you go, and I will return you to this land, and I will not abandon you until I fulfill all the promises. And basically, Yaakov receives from God a pass. He receives from God the gift of all gifts, that this trip is going to be successful, he's going to travel in peace and return in peace. Now, what I want to pay attention to today is a very interesting encounter that happens to Yaakov as he arrives to Mesopotamia, as he arrives to Haran. By the way, Haran today still exists. It's in northern Turkey. It's a little village, and it's still called with the name Haran until today. They are still in that place. There is still remnants of the well, where they call it Jacob's well. There is still within Haran, there is still remnants from the times of thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's interesting. I have a friend of mine, Rabbi Mendy Chitrik, who is the Shaliach of the Rebbe to Turkey. And he's been in Turkey for the last 22, 23 years. And he has a trip that he does a couple times a year. He travels throughout Turkey to check on different old Jewish communities, checking on those synagogues, checking on those Torahs, making sure the cemeteries are still intact. It's part of his mission as being the Shaliach to Turkey. He actually is originally is Israeli, but he speaks Turkish. It's like almost like a native language to him and to his children. And I don't know if it was a couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, he sent photos, actually pictures from Haran, from that place where Yaakov marries Rachel and Leah. It's still very ancient and everything looks as time has stopped. Thousands of years ago, the houses are made out of clay and mud. Very interesting. And the language, by the way, the language that they speak in those places, they don't speak Turkish. They speak actually a dialect of Babylonian that it sounds very, very much like Aramaic of the Talmud. And he was recording actually a pastor or a priest or an imam, I don't know what it's called over there in that region. And he was recording a conversation with him. And when you're listening in, it literally sounds like Talmud, because apparently that area used to be a place where there was a lot of Jews lived at the times of after the destruction of the Second Temple. And the Jews between each other, the same way Jews in Europe spoke Yiddish, and in certain countries in Northern Africa and in Morocco and I don't know where, Turkey and Greece, Jews spoke a certain type of a dialect of a mixture of the native language of the country plus Jewish language, Ladino, whatever they call it. In that area, There was Aramaic. Aramaic was a mixture of words in Babylonian, words in the language, the native language of the country, plus many, many words in Hebrew that made it sound Aramaic. Anyways, Yaakov arrives to Haran. I want to quote you the verse inside. This is chapter 29, verse 1. Vayisa Yaakov Raglov. Yaakov lifted his feet. Interesting expression. Yaakov lifted his feet. What does it mean? Yaakov lifted his feet. So Rashi says he heard good news. He was promised that he will be guarded. And all that good news made his walking lighter. He felt like he's being lifted off the ground. So this is why the verse uses an interesting term. Yaakov lifted his feet. Vayelech arzo b'nei kedem. He went to the land of the people of the east. Vayar, suddenly he sees vehine be'er basode. He sees a well in the field, and around the well he sees three flocks of sheep around the well, and they all are sitting on the ground next to the well. From that well, this is where the sheep are going to come to be drinking from. Ve'even gedoilo alpi habe'er. On top of the snow of the well, there's a giant stone sitting on top of the well, covering the water. Now the verse says, when Yaakov was arriving, he was wondering why is everybody still sitting together, and the verse tells us the secret that when they used to wait, the Nespu Shama Kola Adorim, all the people who herd the sheep used to come together, and they used to roll that stone from the well, and that's how they give their sheep to drink. Now, why was the well covered? Obviously, the well was covered in order to make sure two things. First of all, it doesn't get poisoned. A big fear in those days was that people would come and poison the well, and it's how they would bring illnesses and destroy societies. The easiest way was to hit the water supply. That's number one. Number two, the idea of covering the well was um, in order to make sure that there is no poisonous animals like snakes or poisonous creatures, animals who can contaminate the water. So Yaakov arrives to the well and he asks the people in the well, who are you from? And they say, we are coming from Haran. He says, oh, you're coming from Haran. Do you know Lavan? Lavan, the son of Nahor. And they say, yeah, we know him. How is he doing? Oh, yes, he's doing great. But look, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with a sheep. So Yaakov is having a little conversation with the shepherds, and he says, it's still early in the day. Why are you guys sitting there by the well here like this? Give the sheep to drink and go pasture. And they said, we can't do this until all the shepherds come together, and then we roll over the stone from the well, and then we can give our sheep to drink. Now, when Yaakov sees Rachel coming, he does a very, very interesting thing. I think it's very romantic what he does. When he sees Rachel coming with the sheep, Yaakov gets up, Vayigash Yaakov, Vayagel. Instead of waiting for everybody to help him to get rid of the stone, what Yaakov does is, with his hand, he rolls with one hand, he rolls down the stone, and Rashi says, Ke'odom shemavir esapekak mi'al pitzlochit. He did it so easily, like a person taking off a cap from a jar. To let you know, shekoichoi gadol, to let you know that Yaakov was actually very, very strong. Now, what is Yaakov doing exactly? He's trying to impress this girl to showing him how strong he is. It's an interesting incident. Now, the Torah doesn't tell us anything in vain. The Torah is not a storybook, and there is many details that could have happened in that story that matter or don't matter. It's interesting that the Torah makes a point for us to pay attention for this whole piece, how there is a stone on the well and he removes the stone from the well. Interesting fact that what exactly is this coming to tell us, to teach us, to remind us, to inspire us? What exactly is it coming to tell us? So I want to share with you a couple of teachings that I have learned this week. And I would like to also quote the source of these teachings. The one who compiled this teaching is my dear brother, Rabbi Mordechai, who is the rabbi in the Eastside Torah Center in Bellevue. He shares his teachings, and I felt very inspired by what he shared. And I want to share it further with each and every one of you who is here today. Rashi says, Yaakov wanted to tell us how strong he is. Now, seemingly, we're talking about physical strength, yeah? That even though, you know how old Yaakov was then? What was Yaakov's age when he arrived to marry his wives? So if you don't know, I'll tell you, Yaakov was 77 years old. 77 is the age of my father right now. My father is 77. May he live a long life. And 77 years old is not exactly the age of being able to do some really heroic and strong thing. And just to tell you how strong he was. Now, physical strength, the Talmud says in the tractate of Shabbat that the Shekhinah rests upon a strong person. What does it mean? The Shekhinah rests upon a strong person. It says in Ethics of Our Fathers, Eizehu Gibor Akovesh et Yitro. Who is considered strong? Who is considered powerful? Someone, not someone who picks up 200 pounds. That's just physical strength. Strong person means someone who is able to overcome his inclination. And the first commandment in the Torah, the God commanded mankind. What was the first commandment? So everybody will say, be fruitful and multiply. But really, that commandment had another piece there. Be fruitful and multiply and conquer the earth. God Almighty wants from Adam and Eve to take ownership, take over the universe in under their control. And since Yaakov goes to Lavan's house to get married, he's going to fulfill the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply and conquer the world. Obviously, it's important that Yaakov Avinu should show physical strength as he does that. Nachmanides, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman, that is the Ramban, we many times quote teachings from him. He says, why is the Torah telling us this story? Remember, I asked you the question, why is the Torah telling us the story about this? Says the Ramban, the reason why we tell you the story is to let you know, Koveh Hashem Yachalifu Koach. Those who hope in God, they will strengthen themselves. Yaakov Avinu comes from a long journey. If you remember what happens in the journey, Esav's grandchild, takes everything away from him. Obviously, he's tired, exhausted. He came from a long trip. Says Nachmanides, and here we see that Yaakov goes and he lifts up the stone by himself, a stone that needed all those shepherds to do it together. Yaakov does it all for himself. Says the Ramban, to teach you that this strength of Yaakov, this power that Yaakov had, came from his great bitachon, his great trust in God, and his great fear in God. He had the trust and fear in God. It gave him inner strength, inner energy, physical and spiritual, to be able to do an act that other people can't do at all. That even though Yaakov was tired from the great journey, And there was a great stone on top of the well, something that needed many powers to be removed. We see Yaakov himself managing to lift it up. He's managing to do something that would need lots of strength, lots of power, not because he has physical strength to do it. He's obviously tired, but because he's in touch with his great power of will, his trust in Hashem, in Yirat Shamayim. So says the Ramban, the whole reason the Torah tells us this story is to teach us a lesson that we learn. What does it mean, Yaakov's strength? That each and every one of us, every person, can be exhausted, can be tired, can be in any state of mind that you're in. But once you access your inner strength, once you access your bitachon and you fear in God, you are capable to do the most impossible things. And that is what helped Yaakov to do what he needed to do. Now, those of you who participated in synagogue services during the holiday of Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, the prayers, I don't know if the Sephardim do it as well, maybe Al can correct me or not. By the Ashkenazim, there's a prayer that we do on Shemini Atzeret called Tfilat Geshem. Do the Sephardim do it as well? I don't know. Maybe Al Ben Aliel knows. But Tfilat Geshem is a special prayer that we say on Shmini Atzeret, praying and asking for Geshem, asking for rain.
Tikkun HaGeshem.
Tikkun Geshem, very good. So, but you guys also, we do it doing the Musaf prayer. And doing the prayer of Geshem, what we do is we remind God about merits of our forefathers, Moshe, Aaron, the tribes, and we describe how their service in their life, or certain events that happened in their life, was connected with water, with mayim. Now, when we speak about Yaakov in the prayer of Geshem, we say these words. This is the liturgy by the Ashkenazi prayer books. Maybe Al will say by the Sephardim we say as well. Zechor ta'an maklo ve'avar yarden mayim. Remember the one who used the staff to cross the Jordan that is with water. Yichad lev, yichad lev, yichad lev means his heart was open and generous. Vegal even mipi be'er mayim, and he rolled up a stone from a well of water. And then we conclude, Ba'avuro al timna mayim, in the merit of Yaakov, do not hold back water from us. This is the prayer for rain. And we mentioned Avraham, we mentioned Yitzchak, we mentioned Yaakov, we mentioned Moshe, we mentioned Aaron, we mentioned the tribes. And when we mention Yaakov, we mentioned two events that happened with the water with Yaakov. One event is where he crosses the Jordan River, splitting the river with his staff. That happens on the way down to Mesopotamia, on the way down to Haran. And then we mentioned this, that he yichad leiv. Yichad leiv means he allowed his heart to be open and generous, and he rolled the stone off a well of water. Now, what is this great merit? Why? That he was very strong and he was able to pick up a stone? He went to the gym and he was able to pick up 200 pounds? What type of a merit is that we're asking from God to give us rain? But here, the one who wrote the prayers have revealed us the secret, have revealed to us the secret. How did Yaakov have so much power in his hand to bring water? Yichad lev. Yichad lev means his heart was in a way of designation. It was open. It was tender. With all his heart, with all his might, He wanted to do kindness with those poor shepherds. And when a person is so interested and so willing to do good with someone else, even though maybe physically he doesn't have the ability to do it, financially he doesn't can't afford it, something happens within a person when he desires to do good for someone else, that reveals hidden powers within the person. And with that, we can do the absolute impossible. And what Yaakov, where did Yaakov, suddenly an exhausted and tired 77-year-old man, arriving to the well, where did he get the power and the strength to be able to somehow sweep off this heavy stone that would take many people to do? Yichad Leiv. Something about his heart was so open, was so tender, was so innocent and generous, ready to do good with someone else, that influenced his physical power. And he was able to access such strength to be able to do stuff that are completely impossible. And again, Yaakov didn't just use physical power to do that. He revealed the inner spiritual energy of generosity that he had in his power to be able to roll down a heavy stone. When someone aims his heart to support someone else, when someone makes a decision to be generous with someone next to him, the power of love, yichad leiv, the power of love, suddenly re-energizes you and gives you the ability to do things that you yourself don't even know you can do that. And when Yaakov Avinu commits to do an act of love like this, to bring water to those poor shepherds, especially when he sees this innocent girl who's going to have to be the one lifting up that stone, Yichad Leiv, suddenly he finds the power in him. And as Rashi says, Lehoidiacho, to let you know, shekoichoi godol, his power is strength, not only physical power, the willpower, the power within. Was Yaakov able to lift that stone up by himself? And this is what we tell Hashem. What do we tell Hashem in the prayer for Geshem? We say to Hashem that because of the great will and desire of Yaakov Avinu to help others and being so committed to help others, we asking God Almighty to do the same to us and give us the rain that we need for this coming winter. At the Kinus HaShluchim, we were just participating last week. This is why there was no class last week. Last week, I left Wednesday night to the Chabad Shluchim's convention. It has been a very, very intense couple days. I'm still getting over what happened in those days. It was very inspirational and extremely moving. We got together right after a great tragedy. I'm sure some of you, all of you, are familiar with what happened with one of the Rebbe's shluchim in the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai, got murdered in a very vicious way. We don't even know the details yet, what exactly happened there. And the shluchim were very much in anguish, and there was a lot of sadness. But at the same time, when we all come together at that convention, there's something very magical that happens when all the shluchim are together. There's a certain energy, a certain power from being in a space with so many tzaddikim, so many people who have devoted their life to do good for others. Especially you look at the name tags where people come from, and people show up from places in the world that I cannot even pronounce because it's so difficult, those places, and they live there with their wives and their kids, and they have Chabad houses. It's very, very powerful and very inspirational to see the big shluchim, the small shluchim, the different shluchim. It's like you're walking like literally in a camp where it's humbling. It's very humbling to know that you belong to such a camp of shluchim. And the way the convention is that on Thursday, Wednesday night and Thursday, there is sessions. Shluchim get together, and there is sessions on fundraising, there is session on community building, different groups, teen groups, college campuses, working with community, working with seniors, running a camp, running a preschool. A lot of interesting sessions that I want to participate in all of them, but it, everybody divides themselves in groups. And this year also, I was actually chosen to speak for 2 hours for the shluchim on campus. The shluchim on campus, they really struggled in the last year since October 7th. We all know what's going on college campuses. And they dedicated 2 hours for the topic of mental health and take care on their well-being. And they chose me to come and address them, talk to them, inspire them, and then a Q&A with some interesting questions and answers. It was very special to participate. Then on Friday, all the shluchim go together to the Rebbe's gravesite. So I already went Thursday night. I wanted to kind of like beat the rush. There's a lot of them coming. So I already went Thursday at 11 o'clock at night, and I already spent several hours at the Rebbe's gravesite in the past midnight, praying for each and every one of you. Had you all in mind for blessings and for good tidings and all the good stuff. And then in the morning, around 9 o'clock in the morning, all the shluchim come together. Thousands and thousands of shluchim come into the cemetery, and we sing nigunim, we study together, and then we read a petitioning letter all together to the Rebbe, asking for the well-being of Jews around the world, asking for the well-beings of our community, asking for the success of our work. It's a very auspicious time, very spiritual time. By me, this is actually the highlight of the convention, is that time sitting in the Rebbe's graveside. And then I stayed there for Shabbos. I didn't even go back to Crown Heights. I stayed over there for Shabbos. I really wanted to stay close and do my prayers there. And it was a very special Shabbos, a lot of prayers, spent many, many hours reciting the Tehillim, praying in the Rebbe's graveside in that vicinity over Shabbos. And then obviously Saturday night after Shabbos came out, after almost 48 hours of prayers, I was pretty exhausted. And I went back to Crown Heights to rest. And then the following day, Sunday, is when we take the big picture that you all see the shluchim in front of 770. It was Sunday morning. And then from the picture, we do morning prayers, and then everybody loads the buses, and we go to the grand banquet. The grand banquet is done in a convention center in New Jersey, and there is probably a good 8,000 people in a room, maybe even more. I didn't count. And there's a big dinner. I mean, actually, it's like lunchtime, but it's like they serve a very lavish dinner. And there is different presentation as we eat dinner. People speak, different videos. It was very emotional. The whole thing was very, very emotional. They started with the shliach in Dubai, a lot of emotions. But there was one moment that everybody in the room, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Probably the most powerful, the most potent moment that evening. They brought to the screen the story of a Chabad rabbi with the name Yehoshua Sudakov. Sudakov, Rabbi Sudakov, actually lives in Israel. And he runs a community for people who are deaf and mute. He has the Chabad house for the deaf and the mute. They showed a video of his work. Obviously, he speaks in sign language, and his entire talk, he doesn't hear anything. So his entire talk is in sign language, motions with his hands. He spoke about the work of running a Chabadas and the participation of many people who are deaf and mute. And is in his, even if he gave a speech after that, obviously it wasn't his mouth speaking, it was a recording that was kind of like telling the speech that he was sharing. When he finished giving his speech, the entire room, talking about 8,000, I don't know how many thousand, everybody stood up and just clapped and clapped and clapped and clapped and clapped and clapped. It was like the most inspiring moment that literally rattled the room. What he said was, he says, for a deaf person to be in a community is extremely challenging. The whole point of community is communication. That's what the word community is. It's a place of communication. When the most important part of communication, speaking and hearing, this is the place where all the exchange happens, is suspended from a person, it literally leaves you all alone. And Rabbi Sudakov says, I came with my Chabad house to change this narrative, to basically recreate this idea and remind people who are deaf and mute that, that they are part of a Jewish community. And he says the Rebbe taught us, yeah, that it should be every person should feel belonging. Every Jew has to feel like he's belonging. And therefore, the Rebbe taught us Avas Israel. And I was thinking to myself, where can I create a sense of belonging? I can't communicate, I can't talk to anybody, I can't hear anyone. Where could I create this sense of belonging? And this is where the idea of creating a Chabad. Now, his video began with the Rebbe speaking to wounded Israeli soldiers. The Rebbe actually changed the name from the wounded Israeli soldiers. They used to be called Nechei Tzal, and the Rebbe changed their name to Metsuyanei Tzal. And in that talk, it's a very famous talk by the Rebbe. By the way, those of you who read the book from Rabbi Telushkin know about this, that the Rebbe, how much the Rebbe paid attention. The words, the names, the things are named, how much suggestion, how much power they carry in it. And in that talk, the Rebbe spoke about this, that when a person is unfortunately suspended certain abilities from him to have, that's actually a sign that he has other abilities that are more powerful. Meaning to say, if you don't have certain normal abilities that most people have access to, it means that you were given some other powers that are much, much stronger to be able to overcome those parts that are missing and to be able to fulfill the purpose of what you were created. What that talk taught him, this young Rabbi Yehoshua Sadokov, what it taught him was that the Rebbe basically saying to him, you also can. You also can do, yes, you don't have the ability to speak, you don't have the ability to hear, but you have powers that most people don't have. And you can overcome all adversities, all challenges by just accessing those powers that the Abishter gave you. He devoted himself. He was not from a religious home, but he decided to devote himself to the Torah study. He studied to become a rabbi. He got semicha. And he became a shliach to the members of the community. And he had a very, very interesting following of people who he creates classes for them where they can watch Torah learning with sign language. He has done incredible tutorials and work. He showed some of it on his work. It was absolutely magnificent to see how someone, where in a normal society would just say, you know what, you don't have the abilities, you don't have the powers, just sit down, relax, do other stuff, it's not for you. Instead of that, he listened to this yichad leiv, what we just learned about Yaakov, the ability to access those powers that's inside of you. That when your heart is in the right place, when your heart is generous, when your heart is open, you are able to reach abilities that will overcome any limitations, any boundaries. And he was a walking miracle. He was standing there with his hat, with his beard, with his sign language, full of joy. Obviously, we couldn't hear his voice because he has no voice for now. He couldn't hear us clapping, and this is why I was showing everybody how you're supposed to clap so people would know how to clap because people were going like this, and they don't understand that for people who are deaf, when you clap like this, they don't even hear you. But he was able to teach us all a lesson. What does it mean to access your powers? Now you have to remember, according to Jewish law, being deaf is literally considered a condition where you are not obligated in most of the things of the Torah. Do you know that? Someone who is deaf is not obligated in most of the rules of the Torah. So a child under bar mitzvah, someone who is, not in the right state of mind, like someone who is suffers from retardation or and someone who is deaf, this is people who are exempt from Torah. And it's interesting, I think I mentioned it once in this class before. It talks about the laws of if someone what is the compensation that you have to give if you break someone's hand? What happens? What is the compensation if you break someone's tooth? What is the compensation when you make someone blind in his eye? So we know an eye for an eye, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot. Meaning to say, you have to give the price, the compensation, how much a foot is worth. Obviously, there's assessments, there's ways to assess how much a person would like to have both of his feet versus having only one, both of his hands versus one of his eyes versus two. But the Torah doesn't say anything. What happens if you made someone deaf? It doesn't say what's the compensation for making someone deaf. And the Talmud says that if you make someone deaf, you have to pay the entire person. Because being deaf basically means that person is written off from society. He can't communicate. If you're missing God forbid, a tooth, you can still live life. You can still be part of society. Any form of a loss in body parts, you can still be part of society. But when a person is in a place where he cannot communicate, you are done. You're finished. No one can give you instructions, and you cannot share your desires, your needs. But here suddenly there was this incredible revelation that happened this past Sunday night. Someone who defeated this law, a human being who defeated the rule of the Torah, where the Torah says you are not a human being anymore because you are deaf and mute. You have no capabilities. You are total loss. And suddenly we saw a guy who, with the power of love, with the power of commitment, with the inspiration of being a shliach, with the inspiration of being there to help others, he was able to overcome even that the Torah says completely destroys you. He was able to overcome all that and create a community and a following where people of challenges of hearing and could able to come and study Torah, do mitzvahs, do what Hashem wants from them, live a life of meaning. When we come to Yaakov Avinu in this week's Parsha, Yaakov Avinu teaches us when he lifts up that stone, And for Rabbi Yehoshua Sudakov, finding purpose in his life, the stone that he had to lift up, using his deaf and mute deficiency, and to be able to find the divine light that's in there, to be able to find those incredible powers, to be able to become the inspiration through those things. That that is that stone that each and every one of us in our life, we have those things we say, oh, that's not for me. That I can't do this. My age that I'm in, the limitations that I have, the person I'm married to, the financial state I am in. What we learn from here is we learn the ability when there is a state of yichad leiv, when a person's heart is open, when you open your heart with love, suddenly you discover certain things that you have never thought you can do. You can become extremely influential, extremely powerful. There's a saying in Hebrew, Ein davar ha'omed bifnei aratzon. Translation means there is nothing that stands before a person's will. If you want, it's all about wanting. In the moment you want something, you will get there. And now this phrase, En davar ha'omed bifnei aratzon, the first letter, Ein davar, ha'omed, hey, bifnei haratzon, beis hey, makes the letters ahava, love. When a person is in a state of love, when a person's heart is open, when a person allows himself to feel that love, like Yaakov when he sees Rachel, when that love is available, there's nothing that will stand in your way. You are able to overcome any adversities. There was a great rabbi in New York, Rabbi Simcha Elberg. He used to come participate in the Rebbe's gatherings. And there was one time he wrote an essay about the Rebbe's greatness. And he was writing about the Rebbe's, people are shocked by the influence that one Rebbe in one office in New York has over the whole world. How could one person do so much? Almost historically, there was never a leader who had such a scattered influence all over the world, literally, the way the Rebbe did. And literally rebuilding the whole Jewish world after the ruins of World War II and the Holocaust and Europe and even in the northern African countries. How does he do it? And he brought the verse regarding Yaakov and Rachel, and Yaakov lifting the stone. And he asked over there in his article, he says, where did Yaakov add such powers to lift such a heavy stone? And he brings from the teachings of Musar that we see when a person's life is in danger. Let's say, God forbid, it is the adrenaline that kicks in when there is a fire or something, that a person can do, pick up things that is way above his power to do. And when there's real danger, a person receives suddenly, because of the adrenaline that kicks into your body, that you can do really heroic things in that moment without running for miles, without breathing. In a normal state of mind, a person would never be able to do this. And he writes in that article, the Rebbe saw the danger. He sees how the Jewish world and the Torah, how religion are about to get destroyed, annihilated. And the Rebbe was acting from that place. What that Shliach taught us in that speech on Sunday night, he wasn't speaking with the language that we speak. He wasn't using his words of his mouth, but he spoke from a language that everybody in the room connected to. He spoke from his heart. Those hand motions that he was using, and the quiet in the room, and just seeing the words on the screen and the images, this drop silence that was in the room, just seeing his hands movement. He was able to speak to us straight from the purest place in a person's heart. And he was teaching us all that when a person is doing the yichad lev, and a person aims his heart, concentrates his heart just to do love with other people, just to bring people closer, suddenly something miraculous happens. You can move mountains. From being deaf and being a mute, you suddenly become a person who is so loud, so inspiring. And the same way, like in a time of danger, suddenly powers are being revealed. How much potential do you have when your heart is open with love? How many people can you move when your heart is generous and open? The Ramban finishes up and he says as follows. There is also a secret here regarding the future of the Jewish people. It says that he saw 3 flocks of sheep. We have to know this detail too, that there were 3 flocks of sheep by the well. Says the Ramban, there is some really secrets here about the future of the Jewish people. The well refers to the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, that will be built for the descendants of Yaakov. The 3 flocks of sheep refers to the 3 holidays, the 3 holidays of pilgrimage, where the Jewish people will go up with their offerings to the temple. And from that well, the sheep will be satiated and they will get what they need. It refers to the time when we used to go up to the temple 3 times a year and we would receive prophecy, we would receive holiness. Yeah. Shama kol adarim, all the shepherds, all the sheep, all the Jews will come up there. And together we will be there to remove the stone, each one of us on our heart. Sometimes there is a stone sitting on our hearts. And by going up to the temple, going up to the Beis Hamikdash, we are removing that stone from our heart and we allow ourselves to drink the waters of inspiration. And basically, what the verse is telling us is there will be a time when we're all going to come together to celebrate those holidays. And the same way, like Yaakov took off that stone and gave water to drink, the same thing also, the time will come and we will be removing that stone and we're going to be drinking until the next holiday. What Yaakov reveals to each and every one of us in this teaching. Remember that quote, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, we can. There is no such a thing you cannot. There is the story with the Baal Shem Tov. There was one sitting with the students and he was learning, and suddenly a coachman knocked on the window and he said his horse and buggy sank into the mud and he needed help. He's asking the Baal Shem Tov and his students to come and help him get his horse is sinking in the mud. He needs help. And they were all sitting in the warm synagogue. They were praying and studying. And the students replied, they said, we cannot help you. We can't. We don't have the ability to help you. And the coachman said, of course you can. You just don't want. Majish, niechachish. You can. Of course you can. You just don't want. Because if you would want to help me, you would be able to help me. Each and every one of us in your own journey in your life, we have to think about those things in our life and do we really want? We really want to make a difference in. How many times do we make ourselves a promise that we're going to do better? We're going to be better. And we say, oh, forget about it. I'm already 50 years old. I'm already 40 years old. It didn't happen till now. It's not going to happen. Comes the Parsha of the week and teaches you if your heart is open, it's all you need. If you let the power of will run your life, if you let that secret gift of Yichad Lev, of opening your heart, you will able to roll up that stone and let that flow of holy waters come through you. It's all up to the power of will. It's all up to desire. And in our prayers, we always say, Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will, God our God, the God of our fathers. Once there is a will, how do they say in English? When there is a will, there is a way. Exactly. So when there is a will, there is a way. So let us work on will. Let us work on will. And the way, all the technicalities, all the administrative pieces will just come together. But once we want, everything will work out. So let us be inspired by the teachings of this week's Parsha. Yaakov goes down to exile. He goes down to the impossible place. The word Haran means anger, a place where God's anger was there. A very bad place. Spending all these years doing the impossible. But somehow from that place, from the darkest of the dark, Yaakov builds a family. He builds a Jewish nation. Don't convince yourself that just because right now you feel like you're in a dark place, that's the moment of you feel abandoned by God or abandoned by your soul, and that's it. There's no hope, especially after everything we went through, the tragedies of this past couple of years. We think to ourselves sometimes we can fall into that despair, believing there's a stone and no one can lift it. Let us remind ourselves that Yaakov in Haran, in the lowest place in the world, in the lowest time in history, somehow teaches us if you focus, if you open up your heart, you will able to remove that stone and you will able to overcome all adversities in your life. Such an important teaching. Very inspired by that. And yes, challenges are there all the time. We have all sorts of challenges. Sometimes the challenges seem unbearable, like it's beyond our capacity. We believe it's beyond our capacity to overcome it. But what this parsha teaches us is, if you really want to, you're able to do this. And Rabbi Yeshua was an inspiration. Was a real inspiration. One of the things he said over there is, you don't have to hear anything. It's better not to hear certain things. And I think he was touching on the topic of innocence by not hearing what's going on around them. It supported him to remain innocent and clear, unconfused. And that's another nugget there, helping us to be inspired by all of this. Wishing you a good Shabbos. Good to see everyone. And yeah,